Welcome to another podcast from the Loft at the Great Falls Youth Center in Patterson. Over the last many months, we've been fortunate to have guests who highlight important functions of state government. We've heard from officials within the state's Department of Community Affairs on topics such as eviction prevention and ending veterans' homelessness, to the president of the state's Board of Public Utilities to learn about utility assistance programs. We've been able to host these podcasts because of our friend Kaya King, Chief of Staff to the Commissioner of the New Jersey Department of Community Affairs, who understands the importance of informing the public about programs that benefit them. And I'm so pleased, Kaya, that you're here with us once again today. And I'm very pleased that we are joined by Alison Chris Myers, who chairs the state's Civil Service Commission. We welcome Chair Myers, and we're eager to learn about all the good work of the Civil Service Commission and the impact that civil servants have on our everyday lives. And I'm also eager for our audience to get information on building a career in public service. And with that, I'll turn things over to Kaya King. Kaya?
Great to see you as always, Bob. Always a pleasure to make this beautiful drive up to Great Falls. And we were just actually commenting before the start, right, where spring has sprung, we're getting into summer. And so it's actually, I think, a perfect time to have you here, Chair, and welcome. We're excited to have you on. I think we've been looking to have you on for quite some time because I think, to Bob's point, public sector service is needed now more than ever. And your journey, but also I think the work that you and the team do every day to really support the workforce is why it's also such an attractive and kind of wonderful place to kind of cast your net, especially I think as we are in this time of incredible change. So Chair, welcome. I know, there's obviously plenty of background and you've got an impressive resume. I want to make sure that we hear a bit, from your perspective about your journey. And just to give folks a little context, Civil Service Commission is, one of many agencies at the state, and Chair, correct me if I'm wrong, this flows out of the New Jersey Department of Labor and Workforce Development, correct, as a state department?
Yes, we're in but not of.
One of those fun government phrases, in but not of. We use those often and lovingly. I think that it's a special in but not of. I'm not saying that all of them aren't across the state, but for what you all touch in terms of the really, frankly, hundreds of thousands of public sector workforce members that show up for the state every day, you get to have an incredible eagle-eye view of things. So I want to just let folks know, you were confirmed, Chair, by the Senate to serve as the acting chair on June 20th, 2023. And you've been in that CO role since January 1st, 2023. That sound correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's a good amount of time, right? We're hitting over 2-year mark. We would love to hear, I think, a little bit about your journey. How did you get to that point? I think that was also a historical point as well, making sure that, again, to Governor Murphy's promise, that we have a cabinet that's made of, strong stock and also continues to be one with diverse perspectives and thoughts.
Well, first of all, thank you for having me, Kaya and Bob. I really appreciate the opportunity to be able to come here and share with you all of the good work of the Civil Service Commission. So my particular journey began in public service at least 25 years ago. But why I became a civil servant really started way before that. I grew up in South Jersey, and I came from a very rural part of the state. And what we had in our area were farms and glass factories, actually. And the work that I did growing up with jobs, I was a laborer. I worked in a glass factory. I made deliveries, those types of things. And what really impressed me about those experiences was how the employees were treated by their employers, actually. Some were very good. Some took advantage of the employees. And I had this full panoply of diverse experience. And I'd always wanted to be in a role to where I could advocate for some of these folks that may be getting taken advantage of. So I wanted to do something that served the working community in a way that they're not always helpless. They have an avenue to go through in order to be made whole if there was an issue or concern.
Mm.
So growing up in the late 70s and early 80s, I didn't really have a lot of money for school or anything. So after about a year and a half working in a glass factory, I decided to enlist in the United States Navy. And what I did in the Navy was I was enlisted, like I said, and my rating, the specialty that I worked in was called personnelman. And what we did was we dealt with enlisted members' personnel records, their personnel transactions. And I was actually assigned to an F-14 squadron at NAS Miramar in California, right around the time Top Gun came out, actually.
Oh, wow.
Very cool.
I remember
live
that.
moment there.
So that was kind of cool. But I worked in admin for a fighter squadron. And that was really eye-opening to public service, because there's really one of the greatest types of public service that any person can do, I feel, is serve in our military and serve the country and the nation that way. So I didn't particularly have a skill for flying jets or maybe working in combat or as a SEAL, but I was good at administrative types of tasks. And I saw firsthand how those performance of those tasks with a smile and a genuine interest and concern for all of the individuals that were working on the planes, providing maintenance, the people in supply, the people out on the flight line, the pilots. All of those individuals had different specific needs that they had to have filled from a personnel standpoint, because if they had distractions with personnel, it impacted command readiness, because they were working, they were worried about whatever,
right?
Yes.
So that's really where I started thinking about public service when I got out of the service. So I served 4 years in the Navy, and I had always wanted to come back to New Jersey and attend Rutgers. And what I did when I got out of the service was I started school down home in down Jersey at Cumberland County College. Mm-hmm. And I'd worked my way, I got out in December, and I worked my way through the entire program in a year. I went to school all summer, both the winter and fall session. You could take up to 21 credits at the time, so I did that. So I finished, and I was able to transfer to Rutgers College, which was part of the university system then. And I studied a field called labor studies, which was all about the collective bargaining relationships between union and management, both in the public and the private sector. And I actually had at the time an eye of kind of working for the NLRB.
Was that National Fair Labor Relations Board?
Yeah, the National Labor Relations Board, or the Federal Merit System Protections Boards. And that's what my goal was. But like anything else, life kind of happens, and those types of opportunities didn't present themselves. So I got a little sidetracked, and I worked in private industry for almost 10 years and marketing and sales for a healthcare utilization review company. Now, what's that? They're the folks that you call when you want to pre-cert your procedure for a hospital admission. And part of what our business also did was written record reviews of accident claims or workers' comp claims, and how we worked with benefits and individuals. We didn't have any public sector clients, but how these things impact people's lives, and putting together cases in order for like an insurance company or a litigator to defend their actions or to advance their case was fascinating to me. So I always had an eye on what was going on in the personnel world, human resources. So it was clear that the world of human resources was starting to get much more complex. This is around the time when we first had the ADA come into play, which was a huge legislative achievement for the time.
I remember.
Actually, it was big, and ERISA came around. So there was the world of human resources was becoming more complex and more complicated. So I felt that the best way for me to understand and tackle these challenges was, because I always had the goal of getting into public service, was to go to law school. So I went to law school at night while I was working full time at Rutgers Law School in Camden. And I did that while I was working. And when I graduated and passed the bar, I started looking for government service jobs as a lawyer. And I applied for a position with Bob and I were actually talking about it before the podcast started. I applied for a position with the New Jersey State Department of Personnel as a personnel and labor analyst trainee. And the only requirement was a law degree. And we were in a good place, my wife and I. So I took the test, and about 8 months later, I got called for an interview, and I started working for New Jersey Public Service when I was 35 years old with the old Department of Personnel. And I was appointed to a position in a division called Merit System Practices and Labor Relations. Kai had mentioned it's called DARA now, a Division of Appeals and Regulatory Affairs. And what we did was we prepared and briefed cases for the Merit System Board, now Civil Service Commission, regarding appeals that individuals in public service brought forward for various things. So a police officer may have been disciplined and suspended, or a layoff may have occurred in one of the towns, or we formulated an examination question that was faulty somehow or challenged. And our job was to collect the submissions from each side, brief the arguments, and apply the law, much like a law clerk does for a judge, and provide draft recommendations for adjudication by these quasi-judicial bodies to provide some type of either remedy or not to the aggrieved individuals.
So, when I hear that background, it seems like you've always had a passion for the work culture, right? And the architecture around that, right? And making sure that, I can't imagine the pressure point when you're dealing with military, right? And those demands, and making sure folks are focused, but also more importantly, that you've got some sustainable structuring in how people can address being in work, right?
Exactly. Work is the most important thing in many people's lives. We all have to do it. We all have to make a living somehow. And to be able to assist some way in helping individuals on that journey, because the last thing, everybody has to squeeze out a living somehow, I say. And we want to try to ensure that there is a fair environment for everybody, and people feel like they've been treated fairly. Because sometimes, like, you may not like the result, but the result's the result. But if the process is uniformly applied and there's a way to get your grievances addressed, it's still better in the long run. One of my first supervisors said to me, whenever we respond to something, don't just give them the bureaucratic answer. We want the answer to be satisfying to the individual, even if it's a no for some reason. They should understand why you're saying no, so they could be able to prepare better for the next time.
So all of that great experience led you to where you are today as chair of the state's Civil Service Commission. So for those who may not be familiar, what exactly does the commission do? How does it affect the lives of both public servants as well as the general public?
So what the civil services job is the technical jargon is to provide appointment tools for appointing authorities to be able to carry out their statutory and constitutional mandates. So how do you do all that? What does all that mean?
That's a mouthful.
It is. So what do we do? What are these tools? Well, we want a system that gives everybody an opportunity to compete for public service positions because they're important. They provide critically needed public services in all kinds of ways. So we really want the best people to do this. So how do you get the best people? Well, the public policy of our state is we want to make appointments to our lowercase civil service based on merit and fitness. So what that means is relative merit and fitness for the position being competed for. So how do you do that? Well, the way we do it is through the competitive testing process. So what we do is, okay, so you want to write a test for somebody. Well, you got to know what you're testing. So in order to do that, you need a structure in place to help you develop a test and to help state or local government agencies organize their operations to most effectively deliver these public services. So civil service really all starts with classification of positions, because you can't do anything else unless you have a position properly classified. What does the job do? What are the typical duties of the position? But more importantly for us is what are the knowledge, skills, and abilities unique to that position or series of related positions that successful incumbents or people that have done the job have demonstrated before. So we create, based on this, job specifications that indicate generally what the position or the title is charged with doing, typical duties, and knowledge, skills, and abilities associated with those duties. So why is that important? Well, if I'm going to test for a storekeeper, I have to know what a storekeeper does and what type of knowledge and skills are important for a storekeeper. Organization skills, maybe basic math, scheduling perhaps, those types of things. So based on the classification plan, we are able to do job analysis of positions to do that kind of work. And the job analysis help us develop examinations that we can announce and post for positions to be filled where everybody can have a fair chance to compete based on what they know instead of who they know for that work.
That phrase really strikes me, that this is about hiring people for public jobs based on what they know rather than who they know. That's really important, because without this type of oversight, you'd probably have all kinds of folks who really aren't qualified doing different jobs. And so that was really well said.
And that's really where the concept of civil service first started in the late 1800s. The public service prior to the inception of a civil service type of concept was based on what they called the spoils system.
Yeah.
So depending on, if you supported whatever candidate and if they were successful, everybody went out of government with the patronage system, and the new administration would bring in their supporters. Mm-hmm. And that worked well, actually, for a long time when government services weren't as many. and government was a lot smaller,
Mm-hmm.
right? So as time went on, especially after the Civil War, the services and the size and reach of government expanded dramatically. And with the level of work and what the public expected their government to provide them came under a whole different scrutiny. So in order to address this, the idea of a merit system came up with, we're not going to hire people at the customs house unless they have basic math skills and they can read and they can write, they can cipher, right?
Mm-hmm.
And more importantly, what this system created was what they used to call a classified system of service. So when there were changes in government, you had a consistent civil service there to kind of shepherd all of the services the public has grown to rely on without interruption because of a change of administration, right? Mm-hmm. So maybe you could get away with that in 1820 when it wasn't there. There was no DMV, there was no
infrastructure,
stormwater
waste management,
right.
Fire safety.
So
just to name a few.
The public really demands this level of service without interruption.
Yeah.
So the ideas of tenure for civil service appointees came in. And what New Jersey's civil service system at least strives to do is that there is a balance, right? Because elections do have consequences. Mm-hmm. And what one administration may want to prioritize may not be what another administration wants to prioritize. Yeah. All, legally appropriate agenda priorities. So how to kind of make sure that happens? Well, we have an unclassified service. They're your appointees that get appointed to commissioner positions or chief of staff, high-level management positions, so they can guide the career service folks into, okay, this is where we're kind of going from a policy level now, but we still have to get the public assistance checks out, right? Yeah. So it's like a give and take, right? It's designed to be the best of both worlds because there's a policy, the voters have an expectation that they're going to want their newly elected governments to do certain policy initiatives. That's why they got elected. But they also need to make sure that the lights are turned on at the Department of Public Works every day.
Right.
So what civil service really does is strive to balance those two needs.
And to that point, it occurs to me on those couple of occasions over the last few decades when the federal government has shut down, the party who has been seen as responsible for that typically got political blowback because people want their services. And if any party or individual is seen as the one who is causing a shutdown of government, they pay for it at the polls. I think that says a lot about the need for these merit-based positions and systems.
Yeah.
Just think about if, you don't have your police or fire or
sure.
EMT services or construction,
sure.
or our Department of Transportation is doing remarkable work up in North Jersey for the sinkhole. And there was a huge rock slide.
Yeah.
Well, people still have to get to work.
Yep.
And they're working in these dangerous situations to try to make sure that the roads still operate. And they may be a little slower while they're fixing whatever's going on, but they're on the job doing this, making sure the business of the state gets done. And that's really how the public benefits from public service, because you may be frustrated because there's a little bit of a traffic delay because one of the lanes is closed on a three-way highway. But thank goodness our partners with the Department of Transportation are out there squaring whatever that concern is away.
I think that's important too, right? It's almost, we take for granted this infrastructure and what I think this system, and the foundation of civil service was intended to create, right? Resiliency, consistency. And, I think in some respects, and maybe because I'm really proud of what New Jersey's done and with this backbone of civil service, of that we've got a lot of infrastructure and we've got reliance on government that shows up, that sinkhole that's responded to, that, yeah, you may have, some construction, but you've got so many alternate road options because there's dedicated people who are doing the repairs, who are ensuring that we've got, construction on that.
Yeah, they're doing the repairs, they're directing the detours, whatever scenario you want to pick,
Yes.
know. I mean, we're also, as overall public servants, we're responsible for really one of the highest obligations, and that's ensuring that those most vulnerable citizens and residents of our state are taken care of and have safe places to be and get the right type of care. Our folks in the Department of Human Services and DCF in our Department of Health do wonderful things for those challenged communities that can be most vulnerable. Consider what life would be like without somebody like a human services assistant working on a floor, bringing meals to your grandmother who might happen to be in one of the Department of Health's homes, or a loved one. They make the experience and provide this valuable service to our neighbors. This is what public service is all about. And this is why there needs to be that resiliency, that consistency, that level of service that's provided that a merit system encourages.
And I think to that point, right, how folks answer the call is also very contingent on the work lifestyle that they have to exist in, right? To go and visit folks in their homes, to build affordable housing, to ensure folks have critical assistance, food assistance, utility assistance, secure, safe, environmentally, structured housing and environments. People need to feel like they're also in a workforce that supports them. And, I wanted to hear a bit from you. I think a lot of the theme I hear about your journey, Chair Myers, and also I think about civil services, answering the call. I mean, you all serve the people who serve.
Yes, that's exactly what it is. And it was kind of like like the parallel that I made when I served in the Navy. My job was an admin because I wanted to make sure that the guys working on the plane didn't have any distractions so they could make it safe for the pilot, who didn't have any distractions to do whatever their mission was. And it's the same with public service now. Our job is to not only provide a fair and equitable means to get the best and to get people in and to create that resiliency, but also because this helps them focus on what they're expert at: nursing, vital statistics, ensuring, what DCA does just like with the fire community. Can you imagine not having fire code inspectors?
Right.
You know what I mean? And if they're worried about how much they're getting paid or they're having a hard time being recruited, well, that's an issue that civil service needs to assist our partners with DCA with, because that helps them do their mission, which really could be life or death for somebody in the community if these things aren't addressed by the experts in those fields. If there's some distraction that they have that we can solve, this is really what we want to try to encourage.
And, Bob, I think you and I were kind of talking a bit before about, what I think Civil Service Commission does and what it reflects is really a diversity in our public, right? I think where we really see a reflection, but I know you had some thoughts, I think, for the chair on some of that as well, right?
Yeah, I think it's important that when anybody in the public needs a public servant at their avail. I think diversity is important. I think that people, for example, here in Patterson, the local police department, it's a very diverse police department. And I think that's good. And I think that makes the public feel, in this case, as though there are individuals who are policing this community, who look like them, who think like them, who care about the things that they care about. So that type of diversity, I think, is important locally. What is it that you are doing or can do to ensure diversity amongst public employees statewide?
So the diversity conceptually is baked in the civil service, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because it's supposed to be a blind selection process at the end of the day, right? You're competing based on how you form in an examination. And that's really only one part of the selection process. Actually, it's a multifaceted process, but it starts with the test.
Yeah, the what you know.
Mm-hmm. Right? So to encourage diversity, what we do is we make sure we educate the entire community as to our process, the availability of positions, how to get them, who to contact, what training we can do. Like, we have a wonderful program in our law enforcement community. It's a law enforcement mentoring program that targets really everybody who wants to be into law enforcement, but it was specifically designed to assist with recruiting underrepresented communities. Mm. Now, it's not putting our thumb on the scale or anything like that. It's just to get that knowledge out there that, hey, yes, it's okay for you to apply because you are welcome. And you know what? We need you. We need your skills, mm-hmm, your abilities. And who knows, if you don't have a diverse hiring process, it limits your options, because you may have a candidate who represents acres of diamonds, and you're not going to give him an opportunity to shine because of some barrier, mm-hmm, that you have, either culturally or gender-wise, whatever. Mm-hmm. You limit your opportunities, and you limit the potential good and service that they can provide the community as well as for themselves. Mm-hmm. So diversity is a huge part of what we do. We want a fair process. And what you were saying, Bob, about having folks that look like you or experience you in your community work within your government, I think goes a long way in providing credibility for the government itself.
Yes.
And what they do.
Yes.
Right? So what we aim to do is to strike that balance to ensure everybody gets a chance to throw their hat in the ring, as well as to demonstrate, at least from the get-go, hey, what do you got? Mm-hmm. What can you offer us, right? One of the biggest and most important things actually about civil service, at least for career positions, is that the announcement process to fill those positions, at least on a permanent basis, is centralized through our agency. And we give everybody an opportunity to apply. I'm not just giving Bob an application on the side and he's already got the job. Mm-hmm. Everybody gets a chance to throw their hat into the ring and compete, right? Mm-hmm. It's this blind process that we have. Mm-hmm. And I think that goes a long way with our outreach efforts to encourage folks from maybe marginalized or underrepresented communities to get their hat in the ring. We're not just inviting you to the dance. We're also going to dance with you. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's really the, as they say, right, the walk behind the talk. Mm-hmm. Because I think, to your point, right, how are we as government, and Bob, I think we're going back to a common theme every time we get together, right, of transparency and building trust.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
And I think, when I look even at, what Bob and NJCDC do, right, with helping, I think, us message, right, with these public resources. This is here for you. We want to serve you in the way that is going to be successful. Being able to, I think, do that for our own public sector means that we're also encouraging a philosophy that carries over in the services. That's what I really love about this concept.
That is so huge, because you may not feel comfortable just approaching your government for some type of service or assistance or guidance because of whatever your background is. And we don't want to send that message out, right? We want everybody to feel like they are part of the community and deserving. People self-select out a lot based on those things just because they're not comfortable.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And we do not want that type of, it doesn't go far in creating a stronger and fairer New Jersey. And that's the governor's mantra. And that's what we strive to do every day in what we do as public servants, no matter what level.
I just want to add here that in Paterson, we have a very large Bengali population. And it's been wonderful to see the Bengali population now as part of the police department, the fire department, even the tax assessor's office. And members of the Bengali community feel much more comfortable when they can go and talk to somebody who, like them, is Bengali. And it's really been a wonderful, wonderful thing here in Paterson. And so that's so important everywhere.
Mm-hmm. I agree. It helps us all live in community together, because somebody understands, and we get to learn that, basically we have more in common than differences.
That's right.
And I want to really give a shout out to you and the team. You had noted earlier, I think that you all serve not just, I think, as a resource for, the every singular, state worker, but also for the agencies really that are charged to creating this culture and environment. And a lot of, I think, what I've watched you champion for chair, and I also think the Murphy administration and the various agency heads is, how are we deciding to acknowledge the work that's being done, to talk about it, to be transparent and not just the programmatic, right? How are we building stronger, fairer New Jersey with funding, with program support, with initiatives that actually meet the various communities that they serve, not just in action, but the representation. And, I know we're all in government land, but one of, I think, the highlights, and one of the reasons I know we even wanted you on for this month is, May is State Employee Recognition, month. And one of the things I think, as we talk back to this tradition, right, is remembering civil service, the significance of it, but also the people that are keeping this alive. I mean, I really do think, especially when I hear how your philosophy is about the commission and what civil service is meant to achieve, it's a life's blood. I mean, we've got to inject talent in there. We've got to acknowledge the talent we have. But I was hoping you could speak to really what this time also means for you as a, lifetimer in public sector, but also why it matters and why we celebrate it every year. Because I think that's a highlight. If you're not in government, you don't know that. And your team has tried to make sure, I think, to have an even greater highlight emphasis. I saw that there's been spotlighting in local news for some of the state employees that were awarded. But can you share a bit about that? Because I think that's also a really key function of this, and getting the word out about why public sector is so rewarding.
Sure. A lot of time, public service, public servants work behind closed doors, actually, behind like a dusty desk with a pile of papers in front of them, trying to do things. And they're often very unsung. But what they do needs to have an orchestra. So, for example, we had our recent statewide award ceremony earlier this month, and some of the individuals and teams that were nominated were just remarkable. There was a team from the public defender's office that it was the expungement unit, and what they do is amazing. And it's not just oh, we're expunging somebody's past. They're looking for, okay, were there mitigating circumstances, whatever it was. Because when you expunge, say, a woman's record for some type of issue she may have had in her younger days, once your record's expunged, statistically, those women are making 40% more than what they would have before.
Wow.
Same with African Americans. So what they do are helping people to help themselves, taking away these albatrosses that they're carrying for a miscall in judgment or whatever it was, a mistake or being caught up in the wrong place at the wrong time or whatever. And the passion with what this group of individuals, how they approached their work was really remarkable to me. I mean, it was very inspirational to get a chance to meet them and talk to them.
We read all the time about firemen or police officers who just do heroic things to save people and go above and beyond. And that must happen in every department.
It really does. We had an individual who works for the Motor Vehicle Commission. He works in one of the agencies, the old DMV centers. Mm-hmm. And somebody was having a heart attack, and he went and, administered CPR to him until, the paramedics arrived, saved this patron's life in front of everybody. It was
incredible.
It really was incredible. And that's not uncommon. We have a whole group in our Department of Corrections or corrections officers, and they created a unit, the resiliency unit. And very often, corrections officers or people in law enforcement will not talk about their vulnerabilities personally or how the job's affecting them, or because they don't want to, they can't lose that front, that image that they need to have for authority. So they figured out that this has this really adverse effect on the well-being of our colleagues and ultimately the well-being of the population, the community that they serve. So they created this resiliency group, and it's a safe place for officers to go and talk to other officers about issues without fear of repercussion, to help them get through whatever these struggles were. Whereas before, maybe it was looked at as weakness or, oh my God, maybe I'm going to get a fitness for duty or something now, They've created this safe space to do this. And it's been very successful with improving the performance and the quality of life of our colleagues. And that all translates into the populations that they serve and the community that they serve outside of those walls.
I remember, and this takes me back to the early 90s when I worked in state government at the Department of Human Services. There were two employees who were sitting around talking one day, and they happened upon an idea. And lo and behold, when all was said and done, that idea was able to bring in, I remember the exact number, an additional $452 million in Medicaid reimbursement to the state of New Jersey.
Wow.
Not only that year, but then every year since. And that's just remarkable, isn't it? And this happens all the time.
It really does. I could go on and on about the remarkable things, just like in the efficiencies that individuals will come up with. We had one awardee that wasn't even assigned to her, whatever this issue was. It was some sort of collateral issue. She just kind of figured it out doing her work. Well, some other work unit, that was a big block for what they did. And when the two groups finally talked, it was just like, oh my God, this saved all this processing time, cut weeks off of something as simple as, processing a claim.
Right.
You know what I mean? And, it's those types of things. It makes a big difference, because whatever resident is on the other side of that. That could be housing for somebody. It could be food. It could be care. It could be protection. Whatever it is, it really is remarkable. I think the coolest, I mean, they were all cool, but one of the coolest things that there was a program down in South Jersey for oyster shell harvesting, right? And it just kind of touched my heart because I'm from down there. And when I was a kid, I remember going down by the bay, and oyster shells were used as like gravel for driveways and stuff. Well, it turns out that these are ecosystems that the oyster larvae need to attach themselves to host. So they create these oyster shell reefs to propagate the harvest, right? And what they do is they go around to participating restaurants, fisheries, crab shacks and stuff, and get their waste shells, collect them, and build these barrier reefs.
Wow.
So the oyster population and harvest can grow and have a sustainable market.
It ensures that fishermen have jobs and that patrons can order their oysters in their restaurants.
Yes.
That's right.
Right?
That's right. Last time I checked, we are near an ocean. So,
yes.
But I think these are great stories. And I think you've given some wonderful examples, Chair, because some of this is going everything from, environmental resiliency, public safety, and then ensuring that really taxpayer money is going where it needs to go and it's being optimized. And I think, we're in a reality right now with current events and times where it's really easy to forget that a lot of the foundation in government in public service is intellectual, right? It attracts, people that I think have a lot of vision from, financial, from legal, from environmental, right? And ensuring that we've got folks that are really, answering problems that people are facing every day. And, it goes back to me, I think, and one of the, many reasons why acknowledging civil service and preserving that legacy is so important. And that's because we have to keep encouraging that feeder pond, right? To the oyster reference. We've got to make sure we've got a healthy ecosystem of the future leaders coming up. And, to me, when I look at the work that you've done, when I even see examples in my commissioner and even in what we're seeing from our community-based orgs from NJCDC, a lot of this is answering a call and social justice problems, right? And it may not be, something that's publicized. And I think many times it's resolving things that people didn't even know were problems or were going to become problems, as you said, to your point, unsung. And I wanted, I think to make sure, we heard from you too, some thoughtful and imparting words to really encourage, I think, folks who are listening and curious about civil service as a whole, curious about deciding to be the change they want to see, I think, serving the public and what you've done in your career and what we've heard from these incredible stories of our colleagues in state service. What would be your swan song, word of advice, or, just call to action to so many people that may be looking at the state of the world and saying, what can I do? I may know this, but how does that, really make a difference? Or how do I really find my drive or my passion or what is going to make an impact? I think in a reality where it's easy to have distraction away from that. And I think a lot of what you've spoken through is cutting through the noise. But I wanted, our audience members to really hear what words would you give to folks to kind of keep this fire burning that's been started so long ago with civil service?
What I would say is you have to follow your passions. It's huge, but sometimes you get there through unexpected means. Like, I never thought that I would be in my current position. I just never did. I thought I would be adjudicating appeals for my whole career. And I found a lot of great pleasure and joy in that, because yeah, it's just an appeal or whatever, but the person on the other side of that appeal, it's the most important thing in their life.
Right.
It could just be a Friday afternoon easy brief for me, but unless I look at it from the perspective of the plaintiff, I'm not going to do the best job that I can, because it could represent a promotion. It could represent getting your job back. It could represent clearing your record of some type. It could be the difference of the classification of your position, which puts you on a different career path. And I didn't know that I had no clue that I would be doing stuff like this now, doing outreach and educating folks on civil service without being able to go through this, because I got to see all the different pieces of what our agencies do, and more importantly, what our client agencies do. So it was important to learn, right? Mm-hmm. And this way, I feel that it gave me a good grounding on at least what questions to ask when I kind of fell into this job. Mm-hmm. So have your passions, but understand that you can't really start at the top. There's a lesson in everything that we do. Mm-hmm. And take those opportunities, and don't get caught up in the bureaucracy. Think creatively, and don't be afraid to think outside of the box. We used to joke years ago that, they want us to think outside of the box, but hey, we're civil service. We're the box. And you have to be not afraid to make those challenges. Yeah. But more importantly, and it's just like I've told you this before, that what's comforting to me in my swan song here is that I know the level of leadership and talent is there. Just like listening to you and your colleagues over dinner one night, mm-hmm. I thought to myself, the state's in good hands with these women, because they have passion, they have dedication, they're public spirited. They're in public service for all of the right reasons, not empire building, but to serve the community, because it does something for you as well. Mm-hmm. So my words would be to be patient, be open, and to just dream.
Mm. And if I could just follow up as we close out, and probably in about an hour and a half, there'll be 50 or 75 young people across the way in our Great Falls Youth Center. What would you say to a young person who's in high school right now, who may be considering a career in public service? Any words of advice for them?
I would definitely encourage them to do it, because we certainly need the talent. You see, we need them more than they need us, because they're more in tune with what's going on now. Yes. And how are we going to change to be more responsive unless you get this new blood and these new ideas, right? That's really our responsibility to get this. And by coming in, you can be the progenitors of change. You really can. Like when I started working for government, like no matter how you feel about telework, that was just like a no-starter. Couldn't do it. It was, like trying to split atoms or something in your backyard. And even us at our agency at the time was like, well, the work weeks won't happen in class week, blah, 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 NL work week, and all these reasons why, right? And then COVID happened.
Yeah.
And there was technology out there that could facilitate meetings remotely, where you could actually see your colleagues. I mean, that was George Jetson stuff, like when I was a kid.
Right.
I never thought that would happen. Never. COVID really did force us to think differently about how we do stuff. OAL was doing hearings via Zoom. Courts were, right?
Yeah.
So And I think that type of adaptability comes with youth. My kids don't know how to type, but they can go a mile a minute on their phones doing the thumbs, right? Yeah. And I'm stuck with ASDF JKL semicolon.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Right.
So they bring a valuable skill set that may mesh into what we're doing and make it better to serve the community better. So what they may take for granted could be like genius.
Yes.
In stuffy government circles, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So they really can be the progenitors of change for whatever reason they do, for whatever their passions are, for whatever career field that they're interested in.
I like that. It's inspirational. Well, thank you. And that's a message that I'll try and impart to our young people.
No, thank you. Thank you so much for having me here today. I appreciate it. I hope I didn't bore you all too much.
No.
No. I mean, I think what's great, Chair, is that this gives people a behind the scenes look. I think when we started this grand experiment of community conversations, a lot of this was about pulling back the layers. And, throughout this conversation, I've heard the marketer in you. And you and I have, I think, that connection, and Bob, the same thing. How do we spread the word about public service, serving others, and that being a catalyst, not just for the change around you, but the change in yourself? And I think you're a living, proof of that, right? And that I just think the tenacity and energy you bring to this, and highlighting what so many of our public sector workers do with that energy as well, gives people a sense that it's not always what we see in news. It's not always what we may, see on social media. These are your neighbors. These are your friends. These are your family members that make up this workforce. And I think sharing a bit of the behind the scenes and the call to action, as I was thinking and hearing you, right? It almost reminded me of, the Rosie the Riveter, right?
Yes.
We need you. So,
and that's really a great observation, because the needs of the next generation, or the new generation of workers, regardless, have really forced us to take a look at how we do things now. So telework was one example, but other things, for example, we would have employment list that had a duration of 3 years. That means if I start as a young person at a high school or college or whatever, and the next level title list comes out the day I start, what does that mean? It means I got to wait 3 years for an opportunity to move up. Now, that may have worked when we started in public service, but that's certainly not going to work now.
No.
Yeah.
It's just not.
Yeah.
There's a different pace, a different expectation, and these kids are smart, and they will bring their talents elsewhere. So it forced us to kind of reevaluate, well, maybe we need to shorten the life of our list to encourage more people to compete for promotions, right? So we do 2-year promotional list now instead of 3. Just little things like that have helped us. And it's really being driven from our need to bring in talent.
Can I close this out with a story that I heard once about why it's important to have qualified individuals in civil service positions and not, frankly, unqualified individuals, sometimes via the political route? There's an old story about the superintendent, the newly appointed superintendent of weights and measures in, I think it was Bayonne. This may even be a true story. I think his name was Barney. And the mayor was there to introduce Barney to the press as the new superintendent of weights and measures. And they were asking him questions, and one of them asked him, so Barney, you're the superintendent of weights and measures. Can you tell me how many ounces are there in a pound? And Barney looked and he said, come on, fellows, give me a break. It's my first day on the job. And that says it all, right? That's a little vignette about why we need people who are qualified and the civil service and all the good work that you, Chair Myers, does, and you and your colleagues is deeply appreciated.
Thank you again for having me. I deeply appreciate it.
Thank you.
We'll have a fine civil service day.
Yes. Thank you.